I'm Kara Arnold, and I'm going to be sharing 5 tips to do immediately to support upper grade readers who are reading below benchmark. And as you begin to get settled in, I just want you to take a second to think about a student that you've worked with or are working with right now who might fall into this category. It might be one of the students that you chose this session for. And I want you to just think, what are some of the specific challenges that they face? And you can jot that into the chat box if you want, but really I want you to keep that in mind as we go through the next 30-ish minutes. I want you to keep those students in mind so that you can leave with those immediate tips. So today we're going to focus on 5 high impact strategies or tips or things that you can implement to support your upper grade readers who are reading below benchmark. And these are research backed, they're practical, and they're designed to fit with what you're already doing with your existing teaching time. And many of us, and probably all of us who are here right now, have worked with students who are considered below benchmark or significantly below benchmark. But upper grade readers who fall into this category, they face some unique challenges, right? Often they've developed habits to compensate for their difficulties, like avoiding reading altogether, or they're relying heavily on context clues instead of actually using decoding strategies because that's the thing that feels good for them. So just to get us started, I have a mind shift that I want us to hold on to, a mindset shift that I want us to hold on to today. And that's that these kids don't necessarily need easier work. What they need is they need targeted, high leverage supports to actually be able to access reading. And our job as teachers is to figure out what actually it is that's holding them back and then give them those tools to move forward. So let's jump into those 5 things. So first things first is we need to stop guessing about what's causing a student's reading struggles and actually start diagnosing it. Even in upper grades, our kids who are our striving readers often have hidden gaps in those foundational skills. It might be that they never actually fully mastered decoding, or maybe their fluency rate is so slow that comprehension really kind of falls apart and becomes impossible. Or maybe they have vocabulary gaps that make texts tricky and confusing. And again, as a teacher, it's our job to figure out what the gap actually is and not just guess it. Odds are, again, you already know who the players are. You already know who it is that you need to assess. So I'm going to share with you a couple of assessments that you can start to use to begin to pinpoint exactly where a student might be struggling. The first is the phonic decoding assessment. So this can be found on the Mossflower website under assessments. It's broken down into phonics concepts, and it gives a short word list of both real and nonsense words for each concept. So if you have a child who is struggling with decoding, this can help you figure out exactly where the difficulty or the deficit might lie. So instead of saying something like, this kid needs support with decoding, you can shift to, this child needs more support with reading vowel teams or with multisyllabic word reading. So as I said, this has both real and nonsense words on it. And especially in the upper grades, the nonsense word piece is crucial because at this stage in the game, we have so many kids who have just memorized so many words, right? They see a word and they just know what that word is by the way that it looks. They're not necessarily using phonics to decode it. Nonsense words kind of force you to use phonics to decode the word. So it's in that area that you might be able to pick up some challenges that you may not have seen with real world reading. Another one is the on the run fluency assessment. So just to get us thinking about what fluency is, it's often called the bridge between decoding and comprehension. It is the piece where it connects the ability to recognize words with the ability to actually understand and make meaning from the text, which is the goal, right? And our struggling readers often spend so much energy and so much time decoding that they have little left for understanding. And we know that fluent readers are readers who are automatically recognizing words which allows them to focus on meaning rather than word recognition. And kids who struggle with fluency often struggle with comprehension because they're so busy decoding or they're so busy trying to make meaning of the words and scooping them up and trying to figure out how they go together to really fully process the text. Like right now, you might be thinking about a student who's a strong decoder, but they struggle with comprehension. Fluency could be a part of the difficulty. So the assessment that I have put up here is the On the Run Fluency Assessment, which is a part of our K2 reading units of study. But if you could just do this quickly and it'll help you move away from saying things like this kid needs fluency support to being more specific in the area that the child needs fluency support. Like it could be this child needs more support with expression or this child needs more support with phrasing. So when you give this assessment, it's nice and quick, which makes it feel good. But you're just listening to a student read aloud for a couple of minutes, and then you're thinking about where they are on this assessment. So it'll tell you when you're listening to them, it'll tell you not only a lot about their decoding, but also their fluency. So you could think, are they scooping up words into meaningful phrases? Are they reading too fast or too slowly? Are they reading with expression? So this quick assessment can help you pinpoint where the fluency breakdown actually is and then help you determine what to actually teach into next. So once you've assessed, and this is still part of tip one, but you can't just assess and not teach anything. You have to actually address the gaps. So we're going to start off by thinking about decoding. If a student has decoding gaps, don't assume that it's too late to fix them. Older students might need more explicit instruction in decoding, or maybe they mastered short words, but they struggle with multisyllabic words. So here's some things that you can do right away. Number one, provide explicit instruction. This is just an example from a chart that's going to be in the third grade word study that's coming out next year. But this is just an example using syllable types. Many struggling readers don't know how to break words apart strategically. Something like syllable types can come in handy for that. So if we teach explicitly into these, this can actually help kids tackle big words instead of guessing or skipping them. I am not suggesting that you teach all 6 syllable types at once. I'm just sharing the completed chart with you. But once we begin to teach into these, we're giving kids a system for decoding unfamiliar words rather than relying on guessing. You also want to make sure that not only are you giving explicit instruction, but you're also giving opportunities for practice. Decoding practice can happen in several places, but really think about 2 main places. We want it to be happening where we want kids to practice in both isolation and in context. Both are essential, both are critical. In isolation, that's where students get focused practice on a skill. So you might give a word list featuring a handful of words with that concept or with that concept along with other concepts that that they might have learned already. But they're practicing reading those words in isolation. But then you also want to give practice in context because that's where they're applying those skills in real reading, right? There's something to be said about transferring those skills into sentences or into books because that's what kids have to do. So this could be done in decodable texts like the Jump Rope Reader series, which is what I have an image of, but you could also simply just create some decodable sentences or even some decodable texts yourself with your kids. So practicing in isolation is going to build accuracy. Practicing in context is going to build fluency and confidence. And as readers, we need both. And finally, with this, you want to make sure that you're leveraging morphology. Older readers who are struggling often come across long, intimidating words, and they're not going to sit there breaking them apart sound by sound, right? So morphology helps them break words into meaningful parts so they're not sounding out everything from scratch. So if you teach into morphology, not only is it going to help kids decode, but it's also going to improve their vocabulary and their comprehension at the same time. So just with this tip, keep this in mind. Decoding isn't just for our earliest readers, our youngest readers. If kids struggle with word recognition, whether they're a first grader or an eighth grader, we have to teach explicitly. We have to give them lots of practice. And we want to be thinking about how we can leverage morphology to help them work smarter, not harder when they're actually reading. And if they can't decode efficiently, then they won't be able to read fluently or comprehend well either. So, tip two is to provide or prioritize, I'm sorry, high impact fluency work. So, we know that fluency is the bridge to decoding and comprehension. And if a child reads too slowly, their brain is working so hard on those individual words, they lose the meaning of the sentence. So, how can we actually help students build fluency effectively? Um, there's a few things that we can do, but the key is to use simple, high impact fluency routines that don't take a lot of time but provide maximum benefit. So I'm going to go through a few that you can easily embed into your instruction, and I'll go through each method. I'll talk about what it is and how it can be done, as well as who it might be best for. So the first is choral reading. And this is where the teacher and the students are reading a text together out loud at the same time. Think about shared reading, right? It builds confidence, it improves pacing. What do? We choose a short passage, a poem, a selection of a book. Our job as the teacher is to model the correct pace, the expression, and the phrasing as you're reading with students. And you're gradually fading your voice to allow kids to take over. It's best for kids who are reading slowly or who might be struggling with word by word reading because it's going to build confidence for our hesitant readers. We also have echo reading, which is exactly what it sounds like. Teacher models, student repeats. The goal is to get them to try to match the pace, the intonation, and the expression. So again, choose a passage or a sentence or a phrase with natural expression or dialogue and model reading it with proper fluency. And say to the kid, I'm going to read this. I want you to think about how I'm reading it. And now will you echo that back to me exactly how you heard it? It's best for kids who need support with expression and phrasing because it's going to help kids internalize the correct intonation. Then we have partner reading. Partner reading, again, is what it sounds like. Two kids taking turns reading a passage aloud to each other. One listens, one provides feedback. You could take that on the run fluency assessment and use that here. Why might you do it? It's going to give kids practice reading fluently in a low pressure environment and encouraging peer support. We've all heard of Reader's Theater. Reader's Theater is where kids are reading and performing a script. It's not memorization. But one of the reasons that it's great is because there's multiple readings of the same text, which is going to build fluency naturally. So choose a script, a play. You could even choose some dialogue out of a story. Just think about a story that you're reading, find a dialogue. We sometimes say turn the book into a script. Assign kids roles and have them practice reading their parts multiple times, focusing on expression. So Reader's Theater can be great for a lot of kids, but especially those kids who might need support with phrasing and expressive reading. Then we have timed repeated readings. This is going to help build automaticity. So kids are reading the same passage multiple times, again, aiming to increase fluency. The focus here is on accuracy and smoothness, not just speed, right? We don't want kids to think that if they just plow through text, that means they're like solid fluent readers. So here you want to choose a passage that's at this child's independent or their instructional level. And I'm saying this because you just want to make sure that it's not too hard and have the student read for a minute, track how far they get, talk about some errors or tricky words that they might have encountered, and then reread the passage, have them reread the passage several more times. Again, this is best for kids who might need support improving automaticity and reading stamina. And then finally, there's phrase cued reading. And this is just phrased reading with scooping. So this helps kids avoid word by word reading because what you're doing is you're already breaking the sentences down into meaningful phrases or groups. So you're marking where you want kids to pause. It could be with scoops, it could be with slashes, but it's going to help kids. You might, like if you're using slashes, it might be one slash for a short pause, two slashes for a longer pause, like at the end of a sentence. And you're you're kind of like forcing them to get to that slash or get to the end of the scoop. And then kids can practice reading in that text that's already marked. And then you can get them, as a gradual release, get them to practice marking phrase breaks in their own text. So this is best for kids who might be reading too slowly. They might be reading like they're trying to scoop up words, but they might not be making sense. So these are 6 different routines that you could embed into your instruction to support kids with fluency. The third thing that we need to focus on is vocabulary instruction. Many struggling readers don't recognize enough tier 2 words, right? Think about words like you're moving into testing season, right? Like analyze and contrast and emphasize. They're not just big words, but they're the kinds of words that appear in books, in directions, in state assessments. And without a strong grasp of these words, comprehension can break down. Some of our students also lack morphology knowledge. She brought this up in the beginning. They don't recognize common prefixes or roots or suffixes, and that makes it harder to decode unknown words. The good news is that we can teach into vocabulary in ways that stick. So I'm going to talk about 3 strategies, 3 essential strategies that could work. One is to pre-teach some keywords. So before kids encounter a text, introduce those essential words that they'll need to be able to understand that text. It reduces the cognitive load and it helps them focus on comprehension, not just decoding and not just on the meaning. You're already tackling the meaning part. So how might you do it? You could identify, this is just an example, but you could identify keywords from an upcoming passage that kids might be reading or that you might be reading, and you might use a pathway like the one that I have here to teach the words. Say it, clap it, define it, give examples and non-examples, and actually get them to do something with it. It's going to help kids who might struggle with background knowledge and also helps kids feel more confident before tackling a challenging text. You also, again, want to be thinking about teaching morphology, right? You might say like pre means before, re means again. So instead of memorizing thousands of words, kids can unlock meanings by recognizing word parts. Explicitly teach common prefixes, teach that suffixes change the word meaning, and teach students to break down words by identifying roots. It's best to do this to help kids tackle those long, complex words and for building decoding and comprehension skills at the same time. So morphology really has some big importance, especially when we're working with our older kids. And then, of course, there's using word walls and visuals. Go beyond dictionary definitions, right? Students learn words better when they see them in action and they can connect them to what they already know. Use kid-friendly definitions, create some visual connections, and build a living word wall that continues to stay in your class or even in their notebook if you're doing like an individualized word wall. So vocabulary instruction isn't just an add-on, it's very essential for comprehension. If kids understand more words, they understand more of what they read. So we've covered decoding, fluency, and vocab, but even if students have those skills, they might still struggle with comprehension. For many of our striving readers, comprehension isn't automatic, right? They read the words, but they don't always make sense of what they're reading at the sentence level, at the paragraph level, or at the whole text level. They sound good, but they don't really know what they read. That was me. Here's what often happens. They read passively. Words go in, but they don't process what's happening. They don't process the meaning. They struggle to connect ideas, especially in those longer, more complex texts. Here's one to think about. They miss sentence level meaning, right? Sentences are getting more complex as they're getting older. They're not understanding what the sentence means. How are we expecting them to follow the whole passage? Or they depend on a teacher for understanding instead of using independent strategies. The good news is that, again, we can teach kids to actively engage with text and become more independent. So the first one, teach into sentence level comprehension. Our striving readers often don't understand those individual complex sentences, which is what could be making full comprehension impossible. So instead of just jumping straight to summarizing a whole passage or summarizing a whole paragraph, help them break down meaning at the sentence level. It's especially important as we're entering testing season. Another thing, you're already doing read alouds. Leverage your read alouds. Use read alouds to model thinking and to model building background knowledge and to build background knowledge. One of the most powerful ways to support comprehension is through interactive read alouds. When we read aloud, we can model our thinking, we can introduce challenging vocabulary, we can build background knowledge. Read alouds are powerful for all learners, but especially for our striving readers, where read aloud might be the only place to access and practice grade level curriculum, right? You're modeling where you're stopping, you're telling them why you stopped, and then you're getting them to do that thinking work with you in hopes that they're starting to transfer some of that into their own independent reading. And then finally, we want to make sure that we're teaching our students to think while they're reading. Many of our striving readers often just read words without processing what it is that they're actually reading. We want kids to stop and interact with the text instead of reading passively. One thing you could do is you could have kids stop every so often and do something, right? I literally mean that. Stop at the end of a page, stop at the end of a chapter, stop at the end of a paragraph and do something. Give a thought, give a reaction, ask a question, summarize it, but like stop and do something. They might say, this part is important because I'm confused about, I think this means, but don't let them just like read the whole book or read the whole passage and not actually think, because we want to get them to focus in on smaller parts and then connect those ideas. So we've talked about the big skills, but here's the reality. If kids aren't engaged, they may not want to put in the effort to improve. For many of our struggling readers, texts are too hard, too boring, or both. And when kids feel defeated before they even begin, they often disengage from reading altogether. So we want to make sure that we're giving kids texts that they can access and that they want to read, right? It doesn't mean that we're lowering our expectations at all. Instead, we meet students where they are while still challenging their thinking. When we're choosing texts and when we're helping our students choose text, we need to think about two things. Interest. Does this topic or does this format actually motivate kids to want to read? And accessibility. Is the text written in a way that they can successfully navigate it without giving up? So you want to provide texts that are high interest topics. Think about what kids are on about. It might not be the thing that you find interesting, but try to fill your library with things that kids are interested in. They're into sports, they're into mysteries, they're into video games, they're into graphic novels, they're into the I Survived series. Graphic novels, those pair visuals with text, which actually support comprehension, and they often feel less intimidating than full pages of words. They also keep some of our reluctant readers engaged. So don't be the teacher that says, no, you can't read the graphic novels, right? We definitely would actually promote graphic novels. You also want to make sure that you have a variety of formats. So I'm going to say graphic novels again, but audiobooks, articles, short texts, they're not just novels sitting in front of them. If we have articles or short passages, those are going to lower the cognitive load, right? Kids don't have to sustain effort for a long novel. Shorter sometimes feels better. It doesn't mean that it's less complex. So be thinking about how can we let kids access real world topics in a shorter amount of time or in something that might feel a little bit more manageable. Then we have series books, right? Series books, familiar characters, predictable structure, continued engagement. It'll also increase stamina. Kids don't have to relearn new settings or characters each time. Once they're hooked on a series, they keep reading. This is often true also with authors. Once they get to know an author that they like, they want to keep reading books by that author. I know I do it as an adult. You want to think about text with supportive features, text that have images, that have short sections, that have built-in scaffolds. Audiobooks remove decoding barriers. They allow kids to focus on comprehension. They can Kids can get access to grade level content even if they're struggling to decode independently. Audiobooks also support fluency. So think about some of those texts that you might have that have some supportive features built into them. And then there's book ladders, right? Give kids a more accessible version of a challenging text. I think when I clicked on the chat box at once, I saw something about AI in there, but like, especially if it's an article, you could put an article into ChatGPT or into whatever AI platform you're using and ask it to write it at a different level. There's also platforms that are already out there that have texts written at different levels. But again, you want to make sure that you're allowing choice because choice is going to increase motivation. We want to make sure that we're keeping our readers engaged without making them feel singled out. Sometimes they already feel singled out. So we've covered a lot. I know it can feel overwhelming to think about all the ways that we can support our readers, but the key takeaway is this: small, intentional changes can make a huge difference. You do not have to overhaul your entire reading block or your entire way of teaching. I'm going to suggest that you start with one or two strategies and build from there. Your goal is to make reading feel doable, enjoyable, and empowering. So, of course, we hope you continue to stay connected with our community. All of these channels are really great ways to learn about any of our upcoming events and PD opportunities, and simply just to stay connected with us.